The charcoal briquettes glowed a cheerful orange, radiating a gentle warmth that fought off the evening's slight chill. Greg flipped the last of the burgers, the sizzling sound a comforting rhythm to the quiet murmur of conversation. His daughter, Lily, chased fireflies in the fading light, her laughter a bright, ephemeral melody. Sarah, his wife, leaned against the porch railing, a glass of lemonade in hand, and watched their little tableau with a soft smile. "This is nice," she murmured as Greg delivered a plate piled high with food. "Nice is an understatement," Greg replied, sinking into a nearby Adirondack chair. "Peaceful, perfect, exactly what I needed after the week from hell." Took a large bite of his burger, savoring the smoky flavor. The Millers prized these simple moments. They'd intentionally kept the guest list small, just Sarah's parents and their closest neighbors, the Johnsons. No loud music, no rowdy games, just good food and good company. Even Buster, their golden retriever, seemed content, lying at Lily's feet, occasionally thumping his tail against the grass. By 6:30, the last of the guests had departed, promising to return for another barbecue soon. Greg began tidying up, a familiar sense of contentment washing over him. He'd even managed to avoid any mention of his disastrous presentation at work. Sarah and Lily took Buster for a quick walk around the block, leaving Greg to finish hosing down the patio. As he coiled the hose, he noticed a figure standing at the edge of his property, near the meticulously manicured rose bushes that bordered the Whitaker's yard. Corinne Whitaker, the HOA president, was a silhouette against the deepening twilight, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Even from a distance, Greg could practically feel the disapproval radiating from her. He straightened up and offered a friendly wave. "Evening, Corinne, enjoying the sunset." Corinne didn't wave back. She remained motionless, a silent statue of judgment. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharp and precise, carrying across the yards with surprising clarity. "Mr. Miller, I must say, I was rather disappointed to witness such a boisterous gathering extending into the early evening." Greg's easygoing demeanor faltered slightly. "Boisterous? Corinne, we wrapped everything up by 6:30. That's hardly boisterous." "Nevertheless," she continued, unfazed, "the noise level was, shall we say, disruptive. We have regulations regarding quiet enjoyment of property, Mr. Miller. Regulations that are clearly outlined in the HOA handbook." Greg sighed inwardly. He knew this was coming. He'd seen that look in her eye before, the look that said, "I am the rule enforcer, and you, sir, are about to be reminded of my authority." "Corinne, with all due respect, we were hardly making a racket. It was a Sunday barbecue, not a rock concert. Besides, quiet hours don't officially start until 10. "That may be the case," Corinne said, her voice laced with a hint of smugness. "However, prolonged social gatherings are strongly discouraged, especially those that infringe upon the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood." "Infringe," Greg repeated, his frustration mounting. "Come on, Corinne, we weren't infringing on anyone's peace. We were having a quiet dinner with family and friends." He could see Sarah and Lily approaching with Buster, and he wanted to end this conversation before they got close enough to hear it. He knew Sarah had little patience for Corinne's petty pronouncements. "Look, Corinne," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "I'm sorry if we disturbed you, but I assure you we were being respectful of the neighborhood. Can we just leave it at that?" Corinne remained unmoved. "I will be submitting a formal complaint to the HOA board, Mr. Miller, and you can expect to receive a fine in due course." She turned abruptly and disappeared back into her yard, leaving Greg standing alone, the coiled hose heavy in his hand. Sarah walked up to him, concern etched on her face. What was that all about? Greg forced a smile. Just Corinne being Corinne. Apparently we violated some obscure HOA rule about excessive neighborly cheer. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, that woman is unbelievable." "Tell me about it," Greg muttered, his earlier contentment completely evaporated. He looked over at the Whitakers' perfectly symmetrical, eerily silent house. The single light in the living room cast long, menacing shadows across the manicured lawn. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. Suburban bliss, it seemed, was always just one barbecue away from utter betrayal. The envelope was robin's egg blue, the color of a saccharine sky. Greg knew instantly it was from Corinne. He recognized the precise, almost clinical script of the address. He ripped it open, a knot forming in his stomach despite himself. Inside, nestled amongst a scattering of glitter, was a single sheet of paper. It was an official HOA notice. "Violation of Quiet Hours Ordinance 32B," it declared in bold, officious lettering. Below, in a smaller, equally irritating font, was a description of the alleged infraction. Unnecessary and disruptive noise emanating from the property located at 14 Maple Lane on Sunday, July 16th, between the hours of 4:00 p.m. and 7:00 p.m. Noise included, but was not limited to, excessive laughter, boisterous conversation, and the distinct sound of beanbag toss. The fine, $250. Greg reread it, a slow burn igniting in his chest. Beanbag toss, boisterous conversation. He had a quiet family barbecue. His Aunt Mildred had told a slightly off-color joke, and his nephew had cheered when he finally managed to land a beanbag in the hole. It was hardly a rave. As if summoned by his rising indignation, Karen appeared at his front door. She stood on his porch, a thin smile playing on her lips, her arms crossed tightly. She was wearing a crisp white pantsuit that seemed to scream, "I am in charge." "Good morning, Greg," she said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that grated on his nerves more than the glitter. "I trust you received the notice." He held up the blue envelope, the glitter clinging to his fingers like tiny, accusing eyes. "Karen, this is ridiculous. We were having a quiet family get-together. It ended well before 7. I'm sure if you just mentioned it, we would have been happy to keep it down." Her smile didn't falter. "Rules are rules, Greg. Ordinance 32B is very clear. Quiet hours are to be observed. The board takes these violations very seriously." "But seriously, $250 for laughter. My Aunt Mildred has a heart condition. I doubt anyone could have described the sound as boisterous." Greg's tone was reasonable, pleading even, but he felt a flicker of defiance. This wasn't about noise. This was about Karen. She shifted slightly, her gaze hardening. "Perhaps you should have considered that before subjecting your neighbors to such commotion." She enunciated the word with a particular distaste, as if he'd unleashed a plague of locusts instead of enjoying an afternoon with his family. Greg took a deep breath. "Karen, is there something else going on here? Because honestly, this feels a little personal." Her eyes narrowed. "Personal. I assure you, Greg, I am simply upholding the rules of the HOA. We all agreed to abide by them when we moved here." "But you bend them all the time." The words were out before he could stop them. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief flash of satisfaction. "I beg your pardon," she said, her voice sharp. "Your silent meditation sessions, every Tuesday, right in your backyard. I can hear the guided meditations from my kitchen. And last week the wind carried over the sound of someone's didgeridoo. That's hardly silent, Karen." He knew he was pushing it, but the injustice was gnawing at him. She remained impassive, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Those sessions are conducted with the utmost respect for our neighbor's peace and quiet. They are hardly comparable to beanbag toss." "So what you're saying is some noises are more equal than others?" Greg asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Karen's smile returned, colder this time. "Let's just say, Greg, that some residents are more conscientious than others. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay." She turned on her heel and walked back down the porch steps, her white pantsuit immaculate, her posture ramrod straight. As she reached the sidewalk, she paused and glanced back, her eyes meeting his. "Perhaps this will serve as a reminder to consider your neighbors in the future." Then, she was gone, leaving Greg standing on his porch, clutching the robin's egg blue envelope, the glitter sparkling mockingly in the sunlight. The fine, he knew, was just the beginning. This was war. Greg slumped onto Sarah's porch swing, the metal chains groaning in protest. The scent of her honeysuckle, usually a balm, felt cloying tonight. He ran a hand through his hair, already a mess from the day's llama-related escapade. "It's just ridiculous, Sarah. The fine, the llamas, the whole thing. It feels like I'm stuck in some bizarre sitcom." Sarah, perched on the porch railing with a mischievous glint in her eyes, chuckled. "A sitcom you happen to be writing and starring in, apparently. So, fill me in on the fallout from the llama liberation." He recounted the afternoon, the surprised faces of the yoga participants, Karen's sputtering rage, and the triumphant reading of the archaic HOA bylaw. Sarah's laughter echoed through the evening air, but as he got to the part about the fine, his voice dropped. $500, Sarah, for a quiet barbecue that ended before 7. I know it was Karen. She's got it out for me." She practically smirked when she handed me the notice. Sarah hopped off the railing, her smile fading. "That's excessive and completely unfair, especially after the meditation class fiasco." She leaned against the porch post, her brow furrowed. "Have you considered contesting it, officially, I mean?" I tried talking to her, Sarah. Reasoned discussion. She just kept repeating rules are rules, like some kind of broken record. I'm starting to think this isn't just about the barbecue anymore. It feels personal. Personal as in... Greg hesitated, picking at a loose thread on the swing cushion. I don't know. Maybe it's because I called her out on the meditation classes. Maybe she resents me. Whatever it is, I have this sinking feeling she's going to keep finding ways to make my life miserable. Sarah chewed on her lip, a habit she had when she was deep in thought. A moth fluttered around the porch light, casting dancing shadows on her face. Okay, so, if this is a vendetta, we need a plan. We can't just let her steamroll you, Greg. You're too nice. Nice gets you nowhere, he muttered, feeling the injustice of it all simmer beneath his usually easygoing exterior. Nice got you llamas into Karen's meditation space, Sarah pointed out with a wry grin. But yeah, you're right, we need something more strategic. She started pacing the porch, her sneakers scuffing against the wooden planks. First, documentation. Keep a record of everything. Every interaction with Karen, every email, every supposed violation. Dates, times, witnesses, everything. Okay, Greg said, pulling out his phone to make a note. Documentation, got it. Second, we need to find out if anyone else has had issues with her. Talk to the neighbors subtly. See if there's a pattern. Strength in numbers, remember. He nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. That's a good idea. Mrs. Henderson next door has always seemed a bit wary of Karen. And third, Sarah said, stopping in front of him, her eyes blazing with determination, we need to find her weakness. Everyone has one. Something she's hiding, something she's vulnerable about, something we can use to level the playing field. Greg looked up at her, surprised by the intensity in her voice. He'd always known Sarah had a strong sense of justice, but this felt different. This felt almost vengeful. Level the playing field, he repeated, unsure. You mean fight fire with fire? Sarah shrugged, a hint of that mischievous glint returning to her eyes. Sometimes, Greg, sometimes you have to, especially when someone's using the rules to unfairly target you. Besides, she added, leaning closer and lowering her voice, I have a few ideas brewing already. Let's just say Karen might find herself facing a few unexpected HOA compliance checks in the near future. She winked, starting with that shed she built without a permit last summer. The cursor blinked, a digital metronome counting out Greg's frustration on the laptop screen. A tall glass of iced tea sat beside him, moisture clinging to the surface like anxious sweat, but he barely registered it. His focus was laser-locked on the HOA bylaws, a labyrinthine digital scroll that made the IRS guidelines look like a children's book. The initial fine had seemed like a mere oversight, a glitch in the system. Then Karen's superior grin flashed in his mind. Rules are rules, she'd sing-songed, each word coated in a sugary condescension that soured on the tongue. He navigated a tedious gauntlet of lawn grooming stipulations, shrubbery mandates, and the one officially sanctioned shade of beige for exterior surfaces. The monotony threatened to crush him, yet Greg persevered, fueled by an irritation that transcended the paltry sum of $50. It was Karen's double standard, her blatant duplicity, that truly rankled. An hour blurred by, leaving him bleary-eyed. He nearly surrendered, prepared to cut his losses and pay up. Then, seconds from defeat, a heading snagged his attention: noise abatement and community harmony. A click unveiled a fresh cascade of regulations regarding amplified music, power tool usage, and any activity disturbing the tranquility of neighboring residences. His pulse quickened. This was it. He devoured the text, hunting for references to decibel limits, restricted times, anything to vindicate himself. Then, a subclause leapt off the screen: exceptions for HOA-sanctioned functions. A further click exposed a paragraph detailing waiver protocols for events likely to breach noise restrictions. A catalog of requirements followed: date, time, duration, projected sound levels, a comprehensive activity description, and crucially the HOA president's signature affirming consent. Greg's fingers became extensions of his thoughts, dancing across the keyboard. He sought out Karen Whitaker on the HOA website, hoping for a calendar entry or meeting agenda to illuminate his path. Jackpot. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the newsletter archive, a modest announcement: silent meditation sessions with Karen Whitaker, every Tuesday, 7:00 p.m., 8:00 p.m. in the community garden, weather permitting. All are welcome. Silent meditation, he scoffed inwardly. Sure. He recalled indistinct chanting and the resonating tones of what sounded like Tibetan singing bowls wafting from Karen's property on Tuesday evenings. He dismissed it as some esoteric hobby. Now, armed with the HOA rulebook, he comprehended the implications. He juxtaposed the meditation sessions against the noise abatement edicts. The bylaws unequivocally stated, any amplified sound or percussive repetition exceeding 45 decibels during designated quiet hours, 7:00 p.m. 9:00 p.m. weekdays, was strictly forbidden. He'd wager Karen's singing bowls shattered that ceiling, regardless of her insistence that they were vibrational healing instruments. But the ultimate blow was the waiver. He dredged the HOA archives, searching for any record of Karen securing a noise exemption for her meditative practices. Nothing, nada, zip. A slow grin unfurled across Greg's face. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Karen, the self-ordained guardian of HOA propriety, the paragon of compliance, was openly violating her own precepts. And she was doing it in her own backyard, cloaked in the guise of fostering community togetherness. He leaned back, the iced tea now an afterthought. The fine had lost its sting. This wasn't about the cash anymore. This was about evening the scales. He pictured the countless hours devoted to grill maintenance, the scrupulous moderation of music volume, the genuine effort he'd invested in being a considerate neighbor. And then Karen, dripping with sanctimony, had penalized him for indulging in a peaceful Sunday afternoon with his family. A wave of just indignation surged through him. He would contest this, not with heated arguments or fiery pronouncements, but with irrefutable, tangible proof. He bookmarked the relevant bylaw sections, screen-captured the meditation notice, and meticulously cataloged each Tuesday evening when the chanting and singing bowls drifted from his own windows. On the precipice of dispatching an email to the HOA board, he paused. He desired to expose Karen's hypocrisy, undoubtedly, but also to do so with a touch of flourish. He wanted her to fully grasp the farce of her behavior. A mischievous glint sparkled in his eyes. The Llamas were a promising start, but now he possessed a compelling justification to keep them. He started a fresh document, each word carefully measured. He attached the gathered evidence, emphasizing the pertinent bylaw excerpts and methodically detailing Karen's infractions. He concluded with a simple, yet barbed query. In light of these documented breaches of HOA regulations, will Ms. Whittaker be fining herself accordingly? The steam rising from Greg's lukewarm coffee did little to soothe the burn of Karen's hypocrisy. Rules are rules, she'd chirped, wielding them like a weapon. He stirred the coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic, the sound amplified in the otherwise silent kitchen. Sarah was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the injustice brewing in Greg's mind. He needed a plan, not a violent one, of course. Greg wasn't a violent person, but something disruptive. Something that would expose Karen's selective enforcement of the HOA's labyrinthine regulations. He pushed back from the table and wandered into the living room. He paced, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. He needed an idea, a good one, something absurd. He pictured Karen perched on her meditation cushion, eyes closed, radiating an aura of smug serenity. That image ignited a spark. He began to mutter possibilities aloud, each one more ridiculous than the last. Mariachi band, too loud, predictable. He discarded it with a wave of his hand. Release a flock of pigeons, cruel to the pigeons, probably illegal. Sarah shuffled into the living room, blinking sleep from her eyes. Talking to yourself again, honey? She yawned, stretching languidly. Brainstorming, Greg replied, his voice laced with frustration. Karen's meditation classes, they're the key. We need to infiltrate. Sarah perked up, instantly intrigued. Infiltrate how? Disguised as a guru, armed with a tuba. Greg chuckled, not quite. I need something unexpected, something that screams hypocrisy. They sat on the couch, tossing ideas back and forth. Sarah suggested a synchronized lawnmower ballet. Greg countered with a flash mob dressed as construction workers, but nothing felt quite right. They needed something bigger, something fuzzier. Then it hit him. Llamas, he announced, the word hanging in the air like a perfectly formed thought bubble. Sarah stared at him, then burst out laughing. Llamas? Seriously, you're going to disrupt Karen's meditation class with llamas? Think about it, Greg said, his excitement building. Silent creatures, majestic, slightly judgmental looking, the epitome of unexpected. Sarah was still laughing, but he could see the gears turning in her mind. It's brilliant, absolutely bonkers, but brilliant. The image of Karen's serene face morphing into bewildered shock as two llamas nonchalantly chewed cud in her meticulously manicured backyard was too perfect to ignore. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about exposing the absurdity of the HOA, the ridiculousness of Karen's power trip. He grabbed his laptop and started typing. Okay, Operation Llama Liberation is a go. First, we need to find llamas. The search bar filled with llama rentals near me. The results were surprisingly plentiful. Farms offering llama trekking, llama therapy, even llama wedding appearances. Who knew there was such a thriving llama rental industry? He clicked on a website with a picture of two llamas wearing flower crowns. Happy Hooves Llama Rentals, making your special occasion unforgettable. He scrolled through the site, reading about llama personalities, feeding requirements, and the importance of proper llama handling. This was getting serious. He clicked on a contact form and typed a message. Inquiry regarding llama rental for a unique event. Seeking two calm, well-behaved llamas comfortable around large groups of people. And potentially yoga mats. He paused, rereading the message. It sounded insane, but he hit send anyway. Within minutes, his phone buzzed. A text message from Happy Hooves Llama Rentals. So, tell me more about this unique event. Greg smiled. Operation Llama Liberation was officially underway. Greg found Dale Johnson's number on a dusty flyer tacked to the bulletin board at the feed store. Underneath a grainy photo of a man with a flowing gray ponytail and a gentle smile, the words Dale, llama handling, training, and general good vibes were scrawled in what looked like faded purple marker. He figured general good vibes was a decent enough qualification for what he had in mind. He punched in the number. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. Yeah. Hi, is this Dale Johnson? Greg asked, picturing the llama whisperer emerging from some kind of yurt, possibly surrounded by hay bales and crystals. Speaking, you got good vibes, man. Greg chuckled, I'm hoping you can provide some. My name's Greg Miller, I saw your flyer. Llama's right, you got a llama problem. Dale's voice perked up, losing some of its initial drowsiness. Well, it's a llama relocation, actually, a temporary one. Greg hesitated, unsure how to explain the sheer absurdity of his plan without sounding completely unhinged. There was a pause. Relocation? You mean like moving llamas from one place to another? Exactly. I need someone with experience handling llamas, someone who can, transport them safely and discreetly. Discreetly relocated llamas, huh? Sounds like a story, Dale said, a hint of amusement in his voice. All right, I'm intrigued. Where are we talking about relocating them to? Greg swallowed, picturing Karen Whitaker's pristine, Zen-inspired backyard. It's complicated. Can we meet? I'd rather explain in person. Complicated is my middle name. Well, technically it's Bartholomew, but complicated works too. Meet me at the Cozy Carrot Cafe, hour or so. Perfect, see you then, Greg said, relieved. He hung up, feeling a strange mix of guilt and excitement bubbling in his stomach. The Cozy Carrot Cafe smelled of patchouli and freshly baked vegan muffins. Dale Johnson was exactly as Greg had pictured, long gray hair, tie-dye shirt, and sandals, even though it was only April. He was sipping something green from a mason jar. Greg Miller, Dale asked, extending a hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. Call me Dale or Llama Whisperer. Whatever floats your boat. Greg shook his hand. Just Greg is fine. He sat down, feeling slightly out of place in his khakis and button-down shirt. So these llamas, Dale began, his eyes twinkling. What's the story? Escaped circus, witness protection program. Greg took a deep breath. It's a neighbor dispute, a very specific neighbor dispute. He launched into his explanation, starting with the offensive HOA fine and ending with his grand plan for llama-based justice. He braced himself for laughter or disbelief, but Dale listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Greg finished, Dale took a long sip of his green drink. Karen Whitaker, runs those silent meditation sessions. Heard she's a stickler. Greg's eyebrows shot up. You know her. Small town man, everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows Karen Whitaker and her enthusiasm for HOA rules. Dale chuckled. So you want to introduce some natural harmony into her life? Something like that, Greg admitted, feeling a bit sheepish. I know it sounds crazy, but she's been making my life and my family's lives miserable. Dale leaned back in his chair, considering. Llamas aren't exactly quiet, They hum, they spit, they have opinions. That's kind of the point, Greg said, a smile creeping across his face. Dale grinned. I like your style, Greg. I like it a lot. Tell you what, I'm in. This sounds like the kind of llama relocation I can get behind. Relief washed over Greg. Seriously, you'll do it. Sure, I got two beauties aptly named Yin and Yang, perfect for a meditation garden, peaceful yet impactful. Dale winked. Of course, this kind of specialized service requires a certain donation. Greg knew it was coming. Name your price. Dale leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let's just say it involves a generous donation to the Save the Alpaca Fund and maybe a couple of those vegan muffins you got there. They smell divine. Greg laughed. Deal, so when can we relocate? Patience, grasshopper, Dale said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Llama relocation requires planning, finesse, and the element of surprise. We need to pick the right moment, maybe during her next silent meditation session. Greg chewed on his thumbnail, watching Dale adjust Princess Leia's halter. The llama, surprisingly calm for a creature about to be embroiled in suburban warfare, regarded them with placid brown eyes. You sure about this, Greg? Dale asked, his voice a low murmur. Karen seems intense. Llamas are gentle souls. Intense doesn't even begin to cover it, Greg muttered, picturing Karen's pinched face and the crisp, official-looking HOA notice. And these gentle souls are my only hope of reclaiming my sanity. He grabbed Chewbacca's lead rope, the thick hemp feeling strangely reassuring in his hand. Chewbacca, a younger, fluffier llama with a perpetually surprised expression, nudged Greg's arm. All right, Chewie, let's do this. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming petunias, Karen's petunias, no doubt meticulously arranged and perfectly spaced. Greg felt a surge of guilt, quickly suppressed. This wasn't personal, he told himself. It was about principle, about not being bullied by a power-hungry HOA president with an inflated sense of self-importance. They walked the llamas down the street, Greg acutely aware of Agnes Periwinkle watching from her porch swing, a glint of mischief in her eye. She gave him a subtle thumbs-up, confirming her support, which was both comforting and slightly unnerving. Agnes knew everything. As they approached Karen's house, the faint chanting of drifted from the backyard, perfect timing. Greg took a deep breath. Okay, Dale, remember the plan, slow and steady. We want maximum disruption, minimal llama trauma. Dale nodded, his long, braided hair swaying. Got it. Lead them gently into the light. Greg smirked. Just get them into the yard, Dale. He opened the gate, the hinges creaking slightly, a sound amplified in the quiet afternoon. Karen's backyard was an oasis of manicured perfection. A koi pond gurgled softly, wind chimes tinkled in the breeze, and about a dozen people sat cross-legged on yoga mats, eyes closed, bathed in the afternoon sun. Greg and Dale led the llamas into the yard. Princess Leia, ever the stoic, seemed unfazed. Chewbacca, however, stopped abruptly, his ears perked up, and let out a soft, questioning hum. The oming faltered. A woman in a purple yoga suit opened one eye, then another, then she gasped. Slowly, heads began to turn. A collective murmur rippled through the group. Karen, seated at the front of the class on a raised platform, opened her eyes, her face a mask of serene concentration. That serenity shattered the moment she saw the two llamas standing in her backyard. What is going on?" she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. Chewbacca, sensing the rising tension, decided to investigate the koi pond. He stretched out his neck, sniffing the water. A collective gasp went up from the meditation class. "Get those animals out of here," Karen shrieked, scrambling to her feet. Princess Leia, perhaps feeling sympathetic to Karen's plight, decided to graze on her prize-winning roses. Chaos erupted. The meditators scattered, some shrieking, others scrambling to gather their yoga mats. Karen, her face red with fury, charged towards Greg. "Miller, what do you think you're doing?" "Just sharing some educational livestock," Greg said innocently, gesturing towards the llamas. "I believe there's even a clause in the HOA bylaws." Before he could finish, Chewbacca, having finished inspecting the koi pond, decided to try a yoga pose. He lowered his front legs into a perfect downward-facing dog, his fluffy rear end swaying gently. The remaining meditators burst into laughter. Even Dale, usually so composed, was struggling to suppress a grin. Karen, defeated, threw her hands up in the air. "This is outrageous. I'm calling the HOA." Greg smiled. "Go right ahead, Karen. I think you'll find they're surprisingly supportive of our little educational initiative." He knew the HOA would be closed, and the call could wait until they figured it out the next day. The damage was done. The slam of the car door echoed the thunder brewing in Greg's chest. He watched Karen Whitaker, a woman whose face seemed permanently etched with disapproval, march across his lawn. Her linen pants, the shade of a bleached bone, billowed behind her. "Miller," she snapped, stopping just short of his porch. This menagerie has to go, immediately." Greg leaned against the porch railing, feigning nonchalance. He had been expecting this confrontation, though the speed with which she'd arrived was impressive. He'd barely finished raking the llama droppings, a Sisyphean task he was beginning to suspect. "Good afternoon, Karen. To what do I owe the pleasure? And are you referring to Leonardo and Fernando? They're quite charming, I think." Karen's nostrils flared. "Charming? They're shedding all over my petunias, and the odor, I can't even open my windows. This is a clear violation of at least 3 HOA regulations. Noise, nuisance, property devaluation, the list goes on." "Noise, they're quieter than your wind chimes, Karen. And as for property devaluation, haven't you heard? Llamas are the new status symbol. Adds a certain rustic charm, don't you think?" He grinned, a flash of teeth that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't play coy with me, Miller. This is harassment, pure and simple. I'm telling you these animals are gone by sundown, or I'm filing a formal complaint, and I'll be seeking legal counsel." She punctuated the threat with a rigid point of her finger, a gesture he imagined she employed frequently during her silent meditation sessions, probably to mentally silence dissenting thoughts. Greg sighed dramatically. "Legal counsel? Karen, must we be so adversarial? Perhaps we could find a more amicable solution. Have you considered llama yoga? I hear it's all the rage." Her face tightened. "I am not negotiating with you, Miller. This is non-negotiable. Those creatures are a blight on this community." He pushed himself off the railing, finally dropping the charade. "You know, Karen, I've been doing some digging, some research into the, shall we say, historical aspects of this community." Karen crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "And what, pray tell, did you unearth?" Greg held up a laminated copy of a document. The original HOA bylaws. Section 3, subsection C, paragraph 7. It's a real page-turner, you should give it a read sometime. It states, quite explicitly, that members are permitted to share livestock in communal green zones for educational purposes, promoting agricultural awareness and fostering a sense of community. Karen's mouth worked silently for a moment. That's ancient history. That bylaw hasn't been enforced in decades. It's practically archaic." "Archaic, perhaps, but still valid. And I assure you Leonardo and Fernando are providing invaluable educational opportunities. Little Timmy next door learned all about ruminant digestion yesterday. Fascinating stuff." Greg paused, letting the information sink in. "And of course, they're fostering a sense of community. Just ask the book club ladies who came over for llama selfies." The blood drained from Karen's face, leaving it a pasty white. You planned this, didn't you?" "Let's just say I'm a firm believer in the power of historical precedent," Greg replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "And in following the rules, all the rules, Karen." He emphasized the last 2 words, a not-so-subtle dig at her own flexible interpretation of the HOA guidelines regarding amplified sound during her online meditation sessions. "This isn't over, Miller," she hissed, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "Of course not, Karen," Greg said, spreading his hands. "This is just the beginning of our educational journey together." He watched her stalk back to her car, the set of her shoulders rigid with fury. As she peeled out of the driveway, spitting gravel, Greg couldn't help but smile. The llamas, alerted by the commotion, ambled over to the edge of the yard and gazed after her, their large, liquid eyes filled with an unsettling mixture of curiosity and judgment. He scratched Leonardo behind the ears. "Well, boys," he murmured, "looks like we're staying a while." What? The HOA board meeting felt less like a gathering of community leaders and more like a medieval tribunal. Greg sat beside Sarah, the wooden chair digging into his tailbone. Across the polished table, Karen Whitaker glared, her face a mask of simmering resentment. The other board members, a motley crew of retirees and young professionals, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Abernathy, the board's vice president, began, his voice tight. "We've heard Ms. Whitaker's complaint. And frankly, we're all a little baffled. Llamas." Greg took a deep breath. "As I explained in my written statement, the llamas are part of an educational initiative. HOA Bylaw 314, subsection B, clearly states that residents may share livestock in communal green zones for educational purposes." He glanced at Karen, whose lips were pressed into a thin, angry line. Abernathy cleared his throat. "While technically, yes, that bylaw exists, it was intended for something else. Perhaps a petting zoo at the annual picnic." The bylaw doesn't specify the nature of the educational purpose, Sarah interjected, her voice calm but firm. My husband is teaching our community about the importance of South American camelids, their role in ecosystems, and their unique personalities. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Old Mrs. Henderson, known for her love of gossip and bridge, actually chuckled. Unique personalities, indeed. I saw one spitting at Mr. Johnson's chihuahua yesterday. Karen slammed her hand on the table. This is absurd. They're disruptive, they're unsanitary, and they're clearly a personal attack. Abernathy sighed. Ms. Whittaker, while we understand your feelings, we have to abide by the bylaws. We need to discuss this in private. The board adjourned to a back room, leaving Greg and Sarah alone with Karen's seething gaze. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken animosity. After what felt like an eternity, the board members filed back in, their faces grim. Mr. Miller, Abernathy announced, after careful consideration, the board has voted, while we strongly advise against any further livestock-related incidents. We find that you are, technically, in compliance with Bylaw 314. Subsection B, the llamas may remain, provided you maintain them responsibly and ensure they do not disrupt the peace. Collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face turned a shade of purple Greg had never seen before. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You haven't heard the last of this, Miller. She stormed out, leaving a palpable cloud of fury in her wake. Greg and Sarah exchanged a relieved smile. Agnes Periwinkle, Greg's next-door neighbor, gave him a wink. Well done, dearie, she whispered, patting his arm. Well done. The next afternoon, the cul-de-sac was alive with activity. Children, freed from their parents' initial apprehension, flocked to the small green space where the llamas, now affectionately nicknamed Drama and Llama Mia, grazed peacefully. Greg, with the help of the llama handler, was teaching them about the animals' gentle nature and their fascinating history. Sarah was handing out llama-shaped cookies she'd baked that morning. They're so fluffy, little Lily exclaimed, gently stroking Drama's neck. And they're not scary at all, added 8-year-old Ethan, who had initially been terrified of the creatures. Even some of the more reserved adults tentatively approached, intrigued by the unexpected addition to their suburban landscape. The llamas, seemingly oblivious to the controversy they had caused, munched contentedly on the provided hay, their soft brown eyes blinking serenely. From her living room window, Karen watched the scene unfold, her face a study in frustrated disbelief. The neighborhood children were chanting, "Llamas, llamas, we love llamas." She saw Agnes Periwinkle offer Greg a plate of homemade brownies, a clear sign of solidarity. Her carefully constructed world, her meticulously enforced rules, were crumbling before her very eyes, all thanks to 2 woolly creatures and a loophole from a decade ago. A small, llama-shaped piñata hung from a tree branch near the green space, swaying slightly in the breeze. It was a clear, if subtle, mockery of her authority, a testament to Greg's unexpected victory. Karen slammed the curtains shut, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent house. The llamas, she knew, were here to stay, at least for now.